Okay, so we'll try to look for one overarching theme of the parsha. And one thing we could talk about is the very famous Hasidic idea. We'll try to look at it from a different angle, but the Hasidic idea goes back to the Baal Shem Tov, and the Baal Shem Tov explains that the word, Hebrew word for teva, for ark, is the same word as the word for a word. Teva as in a word, milah, a word, is also an ark. And what the Baal Shem Tov says is that if you think about the ark as the haven protecting Noach and his wife and his children from the waters of the flood, and God says, enter the ark because of the waters of the flood. So the Baal Shem Tov says every person also has to enter their own teva, their own words, their own haven. It's a spiritual haven, and it's the haven of the words of Torah and prayer. That is the Baal Shem Tov's teaching. And this teaching has been developed and taken to all different directions. So for example, in the Parsha, the Torah gives us certain dimensions of the ark, but it also tells us certain features of the ark. So we know that we know the size, we know the dimensions. It had a door. It says God closed the door behind him. It also has I guess, a window. There's different interpretations of what the word means, but the word is tzohar ta'aseh teva. You should make light to the ark. Bring light, and that's why there's two interpretations in Rashi. Either the tzohar, the light, either it means a window because a window allows for lights to enter, or it means a stone which reflects light, which is also the idea of bringing light. In any case, you have to bring light to the ark. So the Baal Shem Tov says, when you study Torah and when you pray, you have to study the Torah and pray. That's the environment that you create for yourself. But it's also the concept that you also have to bring light and enthusiasm and excitement into the words of Torah and prayer. Just as much as the prayer is important, it's also the feeling and the excitement that you bring into it, and the same thing is with the Torah. So that's the Baal Shem Tov. Okay, then you have 2 generations later, you have Rabbi Shneur Zalman, the founder of Chabad, and he, again, if we're talking about the concept of teva as a word, as the ark as being a word, which is the haven, the spiritual haven for the Jew, protecting the Jew from the raging waters of the flood, which is the calamities, the distractions, either real or perceived or subjective or objective. But the bottom line is there's distractions out there, the waters of the flood. So if the teva is the protection that you create, which is your ark and your haven that you create, so we take it to the next level. And 2 generations later, Rabbi Shneur Zalman says as follows. Again, let's look at the simple story. And if you look at the simple story, you see that there's a flood. And the word is actually a protection. It's a place for protection. But then something else interesting happens. The verse describes how as the waters of the flood surge upward, the teva, the ark, is actually uplifted. And the ark is uplifted from the earth and floats on top of the water. So vataram hateva, the Torah does the math of exactly how much of the teva sunk into the water. Rashi figures out that I think it was 11 cubits. Whatever the case is, there's a verse that says the teva, the ark, is uplifted. Says Rabbi Shneur Zalman. What's really happening here is that the water, the challenging waters that really could drown you, but if you have an ark, not only are you protected from the water, but rather the water actually elevates you and elevates the ark and elevates the words. And there's a beautiful discourse that we learned in the past, we studied in the past, and Rabbi Shneur Zalman says that the people make a mistake. In general, there's 2 classes of Jewish people. There are people who study Torah all day, and then there are people who are involved in business, involved in the world. And Rabbi Shneur Zalman says the people that are involved in business, they feel like they can't pray with the same intensity and with the same focus and meditation as those who study Torah all day, because they're involved in more materialistic matters. So they don't have the same sense of spirituality. So Rabbi Shneur Zalman says, no, he says that's a mistake. says that, what do you see from the ark? That the challenge is the waters of the flood, which really could drown you. Again, if you create the teva, if you create the ark, if you create the haven, they will actually lift up the ark. So if you're coming to the prayer, but you're coming not from a wholesome environment, you're coming from a challenging environment, challenging spiritually. And like I said, it could be subjective. It could be a person's own worries. That's also great waters that could really take a person over. So Rabbi Shneur Zalman says what happens is that when you come to pray, and when you realize that you're in a space that is wholesome, and now you're in a space that's connected to Hashem, so now actually your prayer is actually intensified and is actually more powerful than the person who is not challenged in the same way. So that's something beautiful about the next generation. So again, we had the Baal Shem Tov who says everybody has to enter words of Torah and prayer because that's your spiritual haven. And we had the next 2 generations later, Rabbi Shneur Zalman says, don't think you're just escaping to the words of prayer, but if you would not have the challenges, you would be better off. Rather, he says, no, the challenges actually intensify the prayer and intensify the enthusiasm that a person has when studying Torah, because a person sees the contrasts and appreciates the protection and the serenity that he has when coming from the outside. Rabbi Shneur Zalman quotes a verse in the Song of Songs, and Tze'echa bachutz, I find you outside. In other words, sometimes when you're distant and then you come back, the feeling of closeness to Hashem is actually intensified. So that's the 2 steps. And then you have the 3rd step. The Rebbe also quoted the Baal Shem Tov and quoted the Rabbi Shneur Zalman, and he added another dimension here. The dimension is that yes, you have to come into the ark, and God tells Noach you have to enter the ark. But the Rebbe always said that if you look at the end of the story, there's a commandment, Seimin HaTeva, go out of the ark. And it wasn't so simple because some of the people wanted to stay in the ark. It says that the spelling of the word, when the Torah says that God tells Noach to take the animals and his family out, so the spelling is a little bit unusual, and it could be spelled as in not take out, but sort of force out. In other words, there's a certain desire to stay in the ark, either because they didn't want to go out and see the devastation. That would probably be the practical interpretation, or the midrashic interpretation that in the ark, it was like the times of the Mashiach because you had the animals living in peace. So it was a miraculous space. Either way, the commandment is you have to go out of the ark. You cannot stay in the ark. You have to go back into the world. And that's what the Rebbe said. Yes, the Baal Shem Tov said, and the Torah says that you have to come in and you have to escape from the raging waters of the world. You have to escape from the distractions. However, that's only step 1. After that, you have to actually go back and take the inspiration from the prayer and take the inspiration from the Torah study and bring it to the world. So that's sort of 3 steps in this teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, of the word for Teva, for the words, and the power of creating an environment for oneself through words of Torah and words of prayer. So that's point number 1. But I'm thinking, what else could we add? What else could we tie in important stories to Noach that are related to the theme of speech? And there's a beautiful interpretation that really is the end of last week's Parsha, but it relates to this week's Parsha because it's about Noach. And there's a very interesting chapter, the beginning of the end of chapter 5, beginning of chapter 6 in the book of Genesis, the end of last week's Parsha, where the Torah lists the generations, the various generations, the descendants, the 10 generations between Adam and Noach. And we know that Adam had 3 sons. One of them was killed. Cain, Adam's son, kills Hevel, his brother. And then they have another son, Shet. Adam and Eve have another son, Shet. And the Torah lists the descendants of Cain and lists the descendants of Shet and gives us a certain amount of biographical information about some of the descendants. Gives us names, but also some of the descendants. Now, for many people, it's actually the most boring part of the Parsha. Bereshit, last week's Parsha, is full of stories and full of excitement. But the list of names doesn't seem to be that exciting and that too profound. But many of the commentaries say, no, you have to look at the names to see what really is happening, what are these stories, and how the people and society develops. If you look at the little information that the Torah gives you, which is the names and the slight biographical information, you could paint together a great story. So we're going to try to get into that story a little bit and see something about Noach and who Noach is and how he becomes who he was. So if you look at the different names, and we basically have two lines of descendants from Adam and Eve, Cain, and Cain over time the generations deteriorate. Cain himself, the beginning of the line, he commits the first murder, he kills his brother, and in the next generations also the names, you could see that there's descent. A lot of the names represent descent. Well, like for example, there's a name Yered, which means descent. There's many of the names have a word that means sort of erasing the name of God. So if you look carefully and you listen to the sound, you could see that we're going for a descent. And indeed, all of Cain's descendants are destroyed. Maybe with one exception. That one of Cain's descendants is a woman named Naamah, and she's listed in the Torah. And the Medrash says that why are we listing the name of Naamah, like the only woman in that lineage that the Torah lists? And the Medrash says that Naamah is in fact marries Noach. She's the wife of Noach. So if she's the wife of Noach, so it turns out that indeed one of the descendants of Cain survived. But that would be the exception to the rule. Generally speaking, the descendants of Cain, certainly the male descendants, are wiped out. Okay. Then you look at Shet, which is the other son of Adam and Eve, the third son of Adam and Eve. And Shet, you have also the different generations, and you have different names. And some of the generations, there are 10 generations, 10 from Adam to Noach. So that would be 9 from Shet. And then you have some better than others. If you look at the names, some allude to descent, some to growth. Eventually, what happens is you get to Noach. And again, last week's Parsha concludes that the entire world becomes corrupt, but it finishes on an upside. And it says, on an optimistic side, last week's Parsha, it concludes, Noach matzah chen b'nei Hashem, Noach found favor in the eyes of God. So the Torah, so there's some positivity in the last week's Parsha. Now, the question is, who's Noach? How is Noach different than his whole generation? Why is it? What about his upbringing? What about his education makes him the person that he becomes, the person who finds grace in the eyes of Hashem, and the person who really is responsible for saving of humanity? So how would you begin to look at that? So there's a beautiful commentary from Rabbi Shamshon of Hirsch, and he says that it's actually a fascinating concept in the sense that if you look at the descendants of both Cain and Shet, both of them have a descendant named Lemech. One Lemech was the father of Noach, and another Lemech was just a Lemech. He wasn't the father, there's this whole story about him, but he has 2 wives, he talks to his wives, he sings a song, but he's not anything distinguished. And Rabbi Shamshon Hirsch is one of the people who tried to look at the names of the generations and figure out the trend. Are we going down? Are we going up? And he gets the name Lemech, and he says Lemech is a neutral name. Doesn't say anything. It's not positive, it's not negative, it's neutral. And again, it's the only name that both the lineage of Cain and the lineage of Shet both have the same name. So that's enough to say, let's compare the two. If both lineages have a Lemech, let's compare the two. Okay, what's the story of Lemech, the descendant of Cain? So in the Torah itself, it's not very clear. It says Lemech had 2 wives, and he told his wives, he sings a song, and he says, listen to me, I killed a man, I killed a man, and I killed a young man, and it's very cryptic. The Medrash says, the story, Rashi quotes it, that Lemech killed his grandfather Cain by mistake, and he also killed his son by mistake. His wives want to separate from him, and he has to sing them a song to tell them, come back to me, I'm not such a terrible monster. After he killed by mistake his great grandfather and his son. What does he tell them? So again, it's poetic, so it's hard to understand exactly what he's saying, and therefore there are different interpretations. But some interpretations say basically what he's saying is, I didn't do it on purpose. In other words, it happens. In other words, it's inevitable. And some of the commentaries point out what he's basically saying. Who did I kill? I killed my grandfather. Well, my great-grandfather Cain also killed. So what do you see? From his perspective, it's in the family. It happens. It's going to reoccur. And there's nothing you can do about it because that's human nature. And that's how he tries to appease his wives and say, don't separate from me. Don't worry. I'm not so bad. This is not such a terrible tragedy. This is normal. This is what happens. So that is Lemech. Now, what Lemech basically is saying is whatever came before you, that's what you're going to continue to do. If your great-grandfather was a murderer, you're probably going to do the same. And it's not really your fault because that's the environment you're from. Now, if that's the lineage, if that's what you believe, then in some sense, it's going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Okay? So that is that Lemech, the descendant of Cain. And indeed, Lemech and his descendants are killed in the flood because they deteriorate morally. Okay, now let's look at the other Lemech. Lemech happens to be the father of Noach. And there's an unbelievable verse. The Torah tells us Lemech has a son. He names his son Noach, and for the following reason. Let's see the reason. So it's at night, so I don't like to read verses at night, but one verse I think I can read. I'll read two verses. I'm reading chapter 5, verse 28 and 29. 28, Lemech lived 182 years and begot a son, and he called his name Noach, saying, this one will bring us rest from our work and from the toil of our hands, from the ground which Hashem had cursed. He calls his name Noach. He says, this one will bring us rest. Why rest? Because the ground was cursed by Hashem. Again, ever since the sin of Adam and Eve, the Torah, God tells Adam that the earth will be cursed because of on your behalf, and you're going to eat from the earth with toil and sweat. By the sweat of your brow, you'll eat bread. And basically, the earth is cursed, and as a result, the person has to work very hard. This kid's a little baby. They didn't have a bris, but let's say they had a bris, but a baby naming. I don't know if they did it on the 8th day or on the first day or the first Shabbos. I don't know. But at the baby naming, father calls his son Noach. What does Noach mean? It's two interpretations. Either it means this one will comfort us, or this one, like they translate here in the English, based on Rashi, this one will bring us rest. Noach from the name rest. So it's either comfort or rest. Rashi says it's not comfort, because if it would be comfort, it should have been Menachem. If it means he will bring us comfort, that's what Rashi says. But Noach doesn't mean, according to Rashi, Noach does not come, even though it's very similar, doesn't mean that it doesn't come from the word comfort. It comes from the word bring us rest. But in any case, the earth is cursed, and this child will bring us rest from the curse. And indeed, the Medrash says, how did Noach bring them rest from the curse? So there's different interpretations. Some interpretations is that Noach was involved in creating some of the tools of agriculture. So, for example, the plow, and therefore he made it easier for people to work the soil, and therefore he brought people peace. That's one interpretation. Another interpretation in the Medrash is that in the days of Noach, the curse of the earth subsided. In other words, the Torah says that the curse to Adam is that the earth will give forth all kinds of, I'm a city boy, all kinds of thorns and all kinds of weeds. Okay. And in the days of Noach, that slowed down. There's still weeds in the earth if you ever tried to plow your garden, plant your garden or your grass, but not to the same degree as it was in the days of Noach. So in other words, Noach brings comfort, he brings rest from the curse that the land was cursed. Okay. So now the question is, how did Noach turn out the way he turned out? So the answer is, what type of environment, what was told to Noach? What did he hear? What was spoken to him? We began the evening talking about the word teva, the word. And basically you create your environment through your words. You can create a holy environment, an environment of an ark through Torah, words of Torah and words of prayer, but also education. What do you tell your children? How do you speak? What is the atmosphere that you create with the words? And Lamech, the son of Cain, the atmosphere he creates is basically you cannot change. You are the product of your society. You are the product of the previous generations, and things are inevitable. And the descent to sin is inevitable. That's what Lamech, the son of Cain, tells his wives and children, and that's indeed what happens, because that's the power of speech. If that's what you say, then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. But then you look at the other Lamech. What does Lamech tell his son? He tells his son, you were going to bring us rest. You're going to bring us comfort. And because Noach heard that, and he heard that hope that was given to him, that's exactly what he became. And he wasn't afraid to be different. And he understood he's unique. He understood he has a unique mission. And just because the rest of the world is corrupt, he still could be the one to bring comfort to the earth, even though nobody else is doing so. So again, there's a lot more to say about the theme of words and speech in the Torah, also in this week's Parsha. But I think these 2 points, the point of creating the ark, creating the environment, creating the spiritual haven through words of Torah and prayer, and then the idea that the words we use in our environment is going to shape our environment. And case in point, whether the person would be the son of Lamech, who ultimately is destroyed in the flood, deteriorates morally, or the person who will believe that he can bring comfort to the rest of the world. He can change the world. He can make the world a better place, even though everybody around him is on a different course. That depends on the words that you hear and the words that are spoken in your environment. So thank you for joining. That's the message in short.